All right, thanks everybody for coming out, especially toward the end of the semester. There's a lot going on today in the window. I'm Dr. McClellan, Director of the Environment Program. Thanks for being here. And today I'm happy to introduce you. We've got two guest speakers. We've got Katie Rompf, who's Director of Labs for Biology and has a lot of experience with wildlife and especially birds. And we have a bird photographer. So this kind of speaks to the interdisciplinary nature of the Environment Program. We've got sort of both science and aesthetics coming at you. That's really all I have by way of intro. We're really discussion focused, just as a heads up, so there'll be about 10 to 20 minutes for each speaker and then ample discussion time. We'll focus on y'all's questions, but Dr. Del Bianco, who's the roundtable coordinator, I'm stepping in today because I planned this one since summer. This date just worked out. But we have some questions just in case, but prefer to focus on what y'all have. So please join me in welcoming both of our guest speakers. Katie Rompf will be going first.
Hello, everybody. If you can't hear me in the back, let me know. I want to make sure you all can hear what I'm saying. Good? Okay, awesome. I am the lab coordinator of the biology department here at Loyola. I completed my undergraduate degree at Loyola as well, and then I completed my master's degree at Tulane in ecology and evolutionary biology. I'm really excited to talk about birds with you all today and to discuss after. Today, what I'm mostly going to be focusing on is conservation and Louisiana ecosystems as they relate to birds. So, all right. Okay, so why are birds important? Very broadly, birds are incredibly valuable ecosystem engineers. And my master's research, if you went to one of my previous talks, I studied seed dispersal by a small frugivorous bird in the neotropics, and I was looking at their ability to enhance seed germination through digestion of those seeds. And so there are countless ways that birds can influence both the abiotic and biotic composition of their habitats. And that was sort of what really first got me interested in birds, was the ecological perspective in terms of how they're interacting with other species and how they're actually, how they can actually change the landscape that they're involved in. So here we have a seed disperser. Some other ecological services provided by birds are decomposition. We have woodpeckers, which are also important for decomposing in terms of, making cavity nests, but also they provide cavity nests for a huge variety of other organisms as well by making those cavities. We have pollinators, predators, and then something that a lot of people forget about is pest control. So an example are barn swallows can eat tons of mosquitoes, up to 100 or 850 insects in a day. So considering we're having issues with mosquito-borne illness, that's another thing to keep in mind with avian populations declining, is that this is one of our ways to naturally control those diseases by killing those vectors via predation. All right. Just to put things into perspective a little bit, since the 1970s, 2.9 billion birds have disappeared. So avian population declines have been really, really drastically falling. And you can see kind of that progress over the years. And there's a lot of reasons that's happened. And most of it is anthropogenically driven. So this includes things like habitat loss, climate change, pollution, and so on and so forth. And we'll talk about the most detrimental effects in Louisiana as well. Something awesome about birds is their ability to inform us about the habitats that they're in. And this isn't necessarily unique to birds, but if you've ever heard the term indicator species, this is a really helpful way to determine the quality or health of a habitat. And so what an indicator species actually is an organism, it's when an organism's abundance, presence, or absence indicates some condition or about the health of the ecosystem that they're in. So for example, these are just a few, there's a lot more, but roseate spoonbills are specialists. So they have this spoon-shaped bill, and they're using that bill to sift through the water at the very bottom, and they're essentially sweeping for tiny invertebrates like larval shrimp and crustaceans and other things. And so those organisms need pretty pristine water quality to survive. And so if they're not able to have that food source, they're not able to roost there, they're not able to reproduce, so they're not going to be there. So even though these are not necessarily uncommon in Louisiana, you wouldn't see one over at like Audubon Park, for example. It would be very unusual because the conditions are not such that are just not conducive to them roosting or being able to survive there. So all of these organisms, something they have in common is they are highly adapted specifically to their microenvironment. So these red cockaded woodpeckers, for example, are a threatened species with pretty low small populations. They can only survive in longleaf pine ecosystems, which is a very small, unique ecosystem that's very dependent on controlled recurrent burns. And so that is an ecosystem that has been pretty substantially lost over the past several decades. Least bitterns is another example, or bitterns in general. They require good quality marsh vegetation in order to roost, lay their eggs. And Louisiana water thrushes are really fantastic indicators of stream health. So I've never seen a Louisiana water thrush. They're hard to find because they need to have a pretty pristine stream ecosystem to be found. So they're a great way of determining the quality of the watershed, stream health, the invertebrate communities as well, and so on and so forth. So yeah. So what's going on with birds in Louisiana? So there's so much to cover, and it was hard for me to decide where to go with this talk. But generally speaking, Louisiana is a coastal state, and there's a lot going on with our coast, and that is incredibly relevant to avian populations here, both coastal and non-coastal species. So we are facing extreme habitat loss, specifically land loss along our coast. Also, coastal Louisiana is a huge migration hub. So where we live is along the Mississippi Flyway, which is a major route that billions of birds take every spring and fall to complete their migrations. So after they fly across the Gulf of Mexico, Louisiana, coastal Louisiana is where they're going to land. And if they don't have a decent habitat to meet them after their very long and tiring journey, they will die. And a lot of birds do die during migration if they're not able to get a sufficient amount of food or cover or sufficient habitat to complete their journey. So, I also wanted to talk about the avian ability to facilitate forest habitat regeneration. So this doesn't correspond as much to coastal habitats, but when we think about clearing of land for anthropogenic reasons and losing forest and trying to recover those areas, birds are a great way to recruit new organisms in to accelerate succession in those sites. And that's why it's really important to encourage birds into your spaces. And this includes like really, really common backyard birds as well. These are organisms that we might not even think about day to day, but are at a small level moving things around constantly to keep our ecosystem balanced and intact. Yeah. All right. Okay. So this is an image of historic and projected land loss in coastal Louisiana. So all of this red is land loss from 1932 to 2050, the projected land loss if it continues at its current rate. So an average of 34 square miles of land per year has been lost for the past 50 years. So there are a lot of teeny tiny islands that have been completely just are gone now. And so this causes, complete disintegration of coastal habitat because it's underwater, which also increases saltwater intrusion into land and also reduce protection from storms. So this has, pretty extreme applications beyond bird health. Of course, this influences our safety as well. So, yeah. I wanted to talk a little bit more about migration. So these are some of the different flyways. We have the Mississippi flyway here, and sometimes we get some overlap with the central flyway. Not all birds migrate, but many, many species do. And a lot of them are going very far. And there are some northern species, such as the scarlet tanager, that live up in Canada and are going all the way down to like Colombia twice a year. So it's a long journey. They'll go down in the fall and then go back up in the spring. And so you can imagine when they're flying across these large bodies of water, once they get to where they're going, they're pretty spent. And I didn't really fully understand this until I went to the Gulf during a migration event, and it's like birds were just crashing out of the sky, and it's like they're so tired, they're just crashing. They were just crashing into the sand. Like it was really, it's not always like that, but it was really dramatic, and some of them just don't make it. And it really, and that's just like the reality. And these northern species that have to fly really, really far actually compensate for that by having larger clutch sizes of eggs to kind of help combat that population loss that happens naturally. But that can only do so much when you're having a lot of other conservation challenges thrown at them as they're completing their migration. So they also might not complete their journey due to window strikes, cats. Birds like to return to their roosting spots, favorite foraging spots. A lot of times when you are tracking a bird or you have banded a bird and you put up bands or a net the next season and you catch that bird, it's likely that it's going to keep returning because that's its normal path. So yeah, there's a reason that as little as 50% of birds survive the trip. And so that is why it is important that we do our part to help how we can. And sometimes even very small things can make a difference. For example, window strikes are a huge issue. My office upstairs, I was getting, for some reason, my downstairs office, this didn't happen, but my one floor higher, I was getting bird strikes all the time. And I just put up a few stickers and it stopped happening. So things like that can save, lives. And if we do that on like a larger scale, I do believe it makes a huge difference. Right. So I feel like you can't really talk about birds in Louisiana without talking about the BP oil spill. This happened in 2010. An oil rig exploded and sunk into the Gulf. And they used to think it was a lot less, but now it's looking like possibly over 200 million gallons of oil spilled into the Gulf and has had long-term effects on these Gulf ecosystems. So I read a lot of different numbers from a lot of different sources, and it's interesting seeing, the different numbers of birds being reported dead and how much that number varies based on who's reporting it. But it's looking like now an estimated 1 billion birds perished from the spill. And so what happens is the oil prevents them from being able to fly. It gets in their tissues, so they can't hunt, they can't complete normal biological processes. And even if they do survive, it can have long-term effects by contaminating their tissues and harming their red blood cells, and they're preventing their ability to reproduce, and probably much more. So there's still, we're still in a lot of ways recovering from this, and it's hard to recover from this because land deteriorated a lot faster after the BP oil spill. So there's a lot of vegetation along our coast that holds that land in place. And so after the oil spill, when that vegetation died, it eroded much, much faster. And because of that, that caused extreme habitat degradation as well. And that also, contributed to the difficulty of recovering it. All right, on a lighter note, I wanted to not be so depressing. I just think woodpeckers are really underrated. And since we're talking about ecosystem services of birds as well, we have some really amazing species of woodpecker in Louisiana. My favorite is the northern flicker. They're just gorgeous. And down here is the red cockaded woodpecker that I was talking about. All the time you see downy woodpeckers over in Audubon, sometimes red bellies, even every now and then a pileated woodpecker. Woodpeckers are really fascinating ecosystem engineers because they are creating, they're cavity nesters. So they're pecking out these big cavities to forage and also to build their nests to rear their young. But when they are done using these cavities and they fly off, tons of other species, not only of birds, but of mammals as well, use those cavities. And so there are tons of cavity nesting species that actually don't build their own cavities. They depend on ones that were previously made. And because of that, they're considered a keystone species in a pretty wide variety of habitats. So this is actually an illustration, I think, of like a Canadian landscape, but there's some overlap of species in there that we have as well down here. And you can sort of see the interactions happening. And there's some cool articles about this too, where you can learn more about it if you'd like. And then these are just some cute pictures I took from the All About Birds article on this. The article is called The Whole Story. It's really sweet, and I recommend looking at it if you would like. Okay. So some things that you can do to help birds, even if it's on a small scale. Bird-friendly green spaces, so planting native vegetation and bird-friendly plants in your yard. Window decals, decals, is that how you say it? Okay, great. So stickers on your windows. Recycle, reduce your single-use plastic. If you want to learn more, the Cornell Lab All About Birds website is really, really awesome, and it's really fun. They have really cool articles, but also they bring a lot of really fascinating studies, attention to those studies that might not be noticed otherwise. And yeah, I think, photography and art is also incredibly important and is a citizen science as well. There are plenty of local artists in the area that have really made a huge difference, and they're focused on avian conservation in the Gulf, and it's pretty awesome. So yeah, thank you.
Well, my name's Steve Michalec. I photograph birds. I don't really like public speaking, but I like birds enough to be here to talk to you about them. So I'm actually glad that you went first, Katie, because this actually I think the order is right here. But just a little bit about me. I've kind of always been into photography and birds, but COVID kind of gave me an opportunity to bring those two interests together. I picked up just a used telephoto lens because I didn't have much to do except to wander through the woods for several days. Well, more like months, I guess. And after more upgrades than I care to admit, this is where I'm at now. This is kind of my primary lens. It's a 600 millimeter. This is a 100 to 300 that I recently got, but I'm hoping to kind of get more environmental shots, incorporating like habitat, and rather than just close-ups of the birds, kind of like that shot there. So I've learned a lot about birds. I have no scientific background whatsoever, but just by observing them out in the field, I've gotten to the point where just about every species that that nests or travels through Ohio where I live, I can identify by sound. So that makes it a lot easier to track them down, to get photographs of them. Still not easy. They're very fast, especially the real small ones. But it's challenging, and I enjoy it. So I've also learned a lot about just habitats, behavior, and how much we as humans can affect the lives of these animals. And I kind of wanted to just talk about that a little bit today. So I thought I'd start with wetlands. We're kind of surrounded by those here, and that's a great egret. That was actually taken in the St. Louis area when I went to visit a friend. But not only are wetlands important to birds for like food, water, shelter, and nesting, but they're important ecosystems for many other species, including humans. They filter pollutants and sediment from water. They store carbon to reduce global warming somewhat, and they actually can help with flooding by absorbing and storing excess rainwater. So humans are very bad for birds, it turns out, historically and currently. We're responsible for a large reduction in wetland, and that's an ongoing issue. It's lost to development, agriculture, et cetera. But there are some good stories here. This bird is a black-necked stilt, and there's an area in northwest Ohio called Howard Marsh. So Howard Marsh was an old farm. The land was donated to Toledo Metro Parks, and they restored it to a native wetland habitat. And shortly after that, certain species of birds started to just arrive and call it home. Now the black-necked stilt, if you look at their range map, that really is not in their typical range, but there must have been a pair of them that just happened to stop on migration and thought, you know what, this place is pretty good. We can call this home. So now there's, I don't know how many pairs, but there's at least 2 or 3 pairs of this species returning every summer to nest at Howard Marsh. So humans can do good things for birds too. Another success story, this is a solitary sandpiper. This was actually taken like 3 minutes from my house. Somebody might know the place I'm talking about, but there's an area, it was typically just filled for ice skating. So it's just a field that has like a slight depression, and they would flood it so that it could freeze in the winter for ice skating. They would drain it in the spring every year. And now, unfortunately, we don't get cold enough temperatures in Ohio to sustain thick enough ice for skating, so they kind of abandoned that project, and they just left it flooded. So that led to species like the solitary sandpiper finding it. Native vegetation took over. These birds started to come in and call it home. Now this species, I didn't see there this past year. We had a lot of rain early in the spring, early summer, and they like to forage on mud flats. So there wasn't really exposed mud for them, so they must have moved on to somewhere else. However, a bird that somebody else just spoke about called it home this year. So there was a pair of least bitterns, I'm pretty sure a pair, but they were there for at least a month or two. Unfortunately, my work got a little busy. I wasn't able to check in on them as much as I had hoped to, but they were there for some time. I'd been tortured by these birds many times before, so I really know their call very well. It's like a deep kind of growl. And so I just happened to be walking by there one day, and I heard that. I was like, there's no way there's a least bittern here. But there was. I saw him multiple times. One time he came out, and I was able to get a pretty cool shot there. So, as Katie mentioned, I guess that speaks to the health of that habitat. So, and then coastal wetlands, we're basically surrounded by that, but they're very important. Unfortunately, there's a lot of loss just to water levels rising and everything, but a lot of coastal wetland area that has not been developed by humans has been protected in like national wildlife refuges, things like that. So some plus side to it. So I'm going to move on to grasslands, another habitat that's quickly being eliminated in the U.S. Agriculture was the main culprit for many, many years, but I think lately a lot of development, which we just can't help but develop everything, I guess. So there are still some grasslands. I mean, a considerable amount, but a lot less than there once were. But birds like this bobolink, they rely on these grasslands. They nest on the ground, as do most grassland species. This is, those longer grasses help them, provide cover and shelter, and, they raise their young and feed in there. And like wetlands, there's some rehabilitation of these habitats happening as well. This sedge wren, I actually took this photo in Columbus, or near Columbus, Ohio. But there's a large area of land that was donated to the metro parks, and they restored it to tall grass prairie. And so species like the sedge wren found it, and they're thriving there. So we need to do that more, in my opinion. Another grassland species, the grasshopper sparrow, another ground nesting bird. I guess one thing that we can do as individuals, I mean, short of buying this habitat and keeping it, as is just be very mindful of the birds when we visit them. So, this was taken in a place where it's really like an urban area and an overgrown field, right? But there's some old roads, and I'm just very conscious to stay on the road, because if you step on their nest, you're not only going to damage the nest, but you're probably going to kill their young. So, we can be helpful for these birds by staying on the trail and keeping your dog on a leash, because dogs can trample their nests as well. A little bit bigger bird, the short-eared owl. They actually do nest in grasslands, prairies, and tundra habitats in the north. But this species migrates, I think most years they do come south. So when they come to Ohio, they rely on those grassland habitats to feed. So not only for raising their young in the north, but when they do migrate south, they're relying upon that habitat as well for just for food source. And the last grassland species, another sparrow, the Henslow sparrow. Another success story, but there are two areas near where I live in Akron. One was an old farm, converted into prairie land, and the other actually was the site of the former arena that the Cleveland Cavaliers played in. And so once they moved to downtown Cleveland, they bulldozed the arena, turned it into a prairie that's actually within the border of the Cuyahoga Valley National Park, which is kind of my backyard, so to speak. But this species probably was, close to non-existent in the immediate Akron area until those two habitats were recreated for them. Now, forests. There are all different kinds of forests all over North America. We're going to start with boreal forest, and this is a great gray owl, aka the Phantom of the North. They rely on this habitat, to raise their young, to feed, etc. Some years, owls, they realize that their food source is dwindling, and in the wintertime, and so they will migrate south. We call that an eruption year. And last year was an eruption year for great gray owls and another species that you'll see next. But typically, this will be my third year in a row, but January, I go up to northern Minnesota just to see these owls and some other northern bird species. Pretty cool to see, but keeping these forests is imperative for the survival of these owl species and other birds as well, especially woodpeckers. They need trees. So obviously the boreal owl probably lives in the boreal forest. These are much smaller than the great grays. They're probably 9 to 10 inches tall, whereas the great grays are 2 to 3 feet, I think. Not quite 3, but over 2 feet tall. Last year was a real treat because it's pretty rare to see these guys move south. And when they do, they're hard to find because they're so small. So there was just such an abundance of them that they were pretty easy to spot. And I got to see 3 or 4 of them in my 2 trips last winter. So moving on to some smaller birds. I was going to talk about window strikes a little bit here. No, it's good. I can touch upon actually Michalec Place, which is a big convention center in Chicago. I think it was 2 years ago. I don't remember how many, but literally, I think in one evening, thousands of birds struck that building and died. And there's a very big birding community in Chicago, so people were very upset about it. A lot of uproar, and Michalec Place agreed to put decals on the window, just little dots. So you can't really. It looks good, it's not like big stickers or anything, but it made a huge impact. It didn't happen the following year, so it just saved a ton of birds' lives. But back onto the forest part of this, birds like this, they typically migrate through Ohio to forests to the north, but I actually photographed this in West Virginia, which is south of where I live, so you wouldn't expect to photograph a northern species there. But there's a little strip, if you look at their range map, that goes through New York, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and it basically just follows the mountains. And most of that land is national forest, so that habitat's been preserved. So, I go up into the northern elevations of West Virginia to camp and photograph birds. And it's very similar to boreal forest where these guys like to breed. So, the National Forest Service has helped keep some of this habitat intact over the years. Just another warbler species that was taken in the same place. The National Forest Service was created to keep foresting or harvesting lumber sustainable. Before there were any regulations or national forests, these timber companies would just mow down large tracts of land, and I guess the government saw a need to limit that, thus founding the national forests. So let's just hope that continues as we move forward and they don't mow down all of these trees. Now these guys you can actually find in Louisiana. Hooded warblers, they nest in forests basically in the entire eastern half of the US. But this species, I get to see them just about every day that I go into the woods in the summertime at home. And the Cuyahoga Valley National Park is a great spot. One of the most visited national parks actually in the US, only because it's like convenient. It's not because it's that cool, but there's a lot of good hiking there, great bird habitat, but taking a hike through the woods in the summertime, it's almost odd if you don't hear one of these hooded warblers. They're pretty loud, pretty vocal. Now, on to coasts. That's a puffin, an Atlantic puffin in fact. And coastal habitats obviously are very important to many bird species, but without the rocky shorelines of the northern Atlantic, puffins wouldn't have a place to breed. These birds live on the water unless they're nesting, and that's the only place they really go to land is to these cliffs in the North Atlantic. So I think Maine, most of Canada, some of Europe, and this was actually taken in Iceland where they have the largest Atlantic puffin colony in the world. So I'm kind of a plover guy. There might be another one coming too, but this is a snowy plover. I took this somewhere in the Bay Area a couple summers ago, but they're very much threatened by development, recreation, along the shorelines. Humans, their dogs, all these things can really affect their young. So, the good news is with plovers, there's a lot of conservation groups, bird lovers that kind of put in the effort to rope off the areas where their nests are, just to kind of keep them a little bit safer. But another dog thing here, I have a dog myself. She loves running on the beach, but if I take her to the beach when birds are nesting, she will be on a leash because, she can get under those ropes. she could affect these guys. So keep your dog on a leash. The piping plover. So this one hits a little closer to home. They nest typically, at least in the US, in the northern Atlantic on the coast, but they do breed in the Great Lakes as well. In fact, a couple years ago, we had a pair in Ohio along the shore of Lake Erie. But similar to the snowy plover, there's a lot of people that rope off their nesting areas. There's actually a park right in the middle of Chicago called Montrose Point, and there's always at least one pair of piping plover nesting there. And they actually have monitors, so people will volunteer to stand there and guard the nest all day long just to make sure that they're undisturbed and give them a chance to survive. Look, it's not a plover. I just wanted to throw in another shorebird that really doesn't nest in our area. Ruddy turnstones, they actually migrate all the way to the Arctic tundra, and that's their preferred breeding grounds. But you can find them all along the coast, Atlantic, I assume Gulf as well. In the wintertime, outside of their breeding season. But while non-breeding shorebirds coexist with humans a lot better because they don't have little ones to worry about, it's still important to just give them their space. Make sure you keep your dog on a leash if there's little shorebirds nearby so that they can stay safe. And lastly, the reddish egret. You have them, reddish egrets, right?
Very, very rare.
Okay.
They're like the big indicators / rare.
Okay. So honestly, I had not seen one of these until this past summer. I go to Florida usually every March for a week or two, but kind of northern Atlantic part, Jacksonville area, and they're very rare up there. So I had a conference in Orlando in August. That's everybody's favorite place to go in August, right? Orlando, second to New Orleans. But anyhow, it was hot, humid, but I did get a couple days at the beach after the conference, and I saw my first reddish egrets, and there were quite a few of them there. There's a huge national wildlife refuge called Merritt Island. Great saltwater marsh habitat. But this was actually taken on the beach directly in front of the condo that I was renting. I'd never seen a reddish egret, period, and all I had to do was go down the elevator with my camera, and there it was. But they're typically, I think they prefer mud flats and saltwater marshes, but you can find them on a beach, especially if it's a long, flat beach, and that's where this was taken. I'm not used to those long flat beaches in the little bit north of where I was staying this time. But this was taken though on a weekday, weather wasn't great. This beach, they allow vehicles on it. So I guarantee you in the summertime, with a bunch of people around and cars driving up and down the beach, you're probably not gonna see this bird there. I don't know. I don't know that there's much we can do about that except any preserved coastline, keep it preserved, and don't build condos on it. So, and that's all I got. I have another slide that just says questions and one of my favorite great gray owl photos, but yeah, feel free to fire away if you have any questions about anything. Thank you.
I'll field questions for y'all. So open to, I have questions, but prepare. But any discussion or questions y'all have for Steve and or Katie? Go for it, Dr. Blake.
Okay. What do you think contributed to the fact that the owls decided to migrate south this year or last year?
So if I'm not mistaken, there's some years where they do very well and they're young, or they're very successful nesting, and I think that kind of dwindles the food supply to some extent. But they have an instinctual sense, I think, that okay, this might be a rough year for food. We better head south. I don't know if you can speak to that any further.
There are birds that sometimes migrate and sometimes don't, depending on resources available and the condition of their habitat. And so if it's looking like food is scarce, then they're not going to stay. They're going to go to where resources are more favorable, even if it's, you know, costly, energetically costly, making that trip.
My thought was maybe it's the fires that might contribute
Yeah.
to that.
Yeah, disturbances as
It
well.
could. It could.
Yeah.
It's looking like it could be a good year for snowy owls. There's been a pair at Montrose Point in Chicago. I should just move to Chicago, I guess, because they get everything there. There was, I think, 2, but they're still there.
I saw a thing on it the other day. I
Is-
was like, oh my god.
If they're still there in January when I drive to Minnesota, I might have to stop.
So the flip of what Sonny just asked is about how some will stay in a place where they tended to migrate and then migrate back. And so I don't know if you've been over to Audubon, you probably had to see our black-bellied whistling ducks.
I have not yet. It was a little rainy this morning, and I was a little tired, but I will get there.
Well, you'll hear them at night flying overhead, going to and from the marsh, but we've noticed that more and more staying here each year as we get warmer and warmer.
Interesting.
I've only been in New Orleans 15 years, and over that amount of time, we've seen the numbers just triple and quadruple over time, staying here.
Okay.
They used to come from Mexico and then back. So, Katie, I don't know if you know more about that from your studies.
That's about all I know with them. I know that it's like in the past, about like a decade or so, and in the past couple of years, there's just been like a huge population increase, and I mean they're kind of generalists, so they don't need super specific conditions to do really well, and so they just thrive over there and like to hang out and make it their consistent stopping point.
Yeah.
So yeah, but they are a little problematic because that many ducks in a small waterway, you know, it's a lot of defecation in the water, and that creates too much, you know, nutrients in the water, and makes the water quality not so good, which has bad implications. So
May, they are saying too that it's been since the building of the South American exhibit in Audubon Zoo,
Oh, yeah, okay.
which is an open extension with a lot of trees for roosting and food that was available.
Yeah.
So the whistling ducks are particular to our area right now. If you go in other parts of the city, you're not going to see them to
Yeah.
that extent.
Interesting.
I hear them all the time at night when I'm playing tennis, flying back and forth.
Are they invasive? They wouldn't be considered that, right?
not technically invasive. I guess maybe problematic would be the best term, just because there's too many. But no, I think they're migrating quite a lot, but they're in their normal range.
What's the best place, say, within an hour of here to go birding?
I asked her that question too.
Depends on what you want to see, right?
It depends on what you want to see. It depends on what you want to see. It depends on the time of day. It depends on the time of year. Some of my favorite spots are Bayou Sauvage, and of course I'm like blanking now. Barataria Preserve.
Well, don't overlook Couturier.
Oh yeah. That's like if you want to stay in the city. It's during fall migration. If you go early in the morning, sometimes you can see some really awesome warblers and tanagers and things. Yeah. Yes.
You called the reddish egret, or whatever it was, indicator bird. What did you mean by that?
So they are an indicator of the quality of their habitat. Yes. Yes.
Do you know of any methods I can promote hummingbird populations in my backyard?
I'm not great with native plant species. There are some really great, like little red native flowers and like shrubs and things. That's a really vague answer, but yes, there are there are plants that you can plant that are hummingbird friendly. I feel like you, Dr. Thomas, might have some ideas.
Any salvia species is going to attract them, and they're cheap, and you can get them from my yard because they spread quickly. And then all the coral honeysuckle that we put right outside the building, is also an
I'm scared to
attractive.
take that away from the school.
Don't take that.
Can also block sight lines. So they're very territorial, so they will not share space. So if there's lots of nooks and crannies, the hummingbirds will they cannot see each other.
A good 15 square feet to make that happen.
Time to build some walls.
Do you have like a gallery where we can see all your photos? Or?
Just my Instagram. I probably should
Share
have
the
put that
handle.
up there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, just at Michalec. See if you can spell it right. Yeah, baby.
Only because I've misspelled it so many times in the last 2 months. But that's on Instagram, and the word nature's not.
Yeah, just not that part. But yeah, that's my Instagram. Yes.
So you mentioned your auditory keenness,
Yep.
especially in the environment and the habitats that you frequent. Do you use that to get your shots in terms of tracking, or do you post up and wait in sniper style shots? Or?
Yes, a little bit of both. I used to just go out into the woods all willy-nilly, like without any specific goal in mind. But I've gotten to know where to find certain species in my area, so I usually go out with a plan. And because of knowing the sounds, I know where to find these specific species. And then once I get there, if you can identify their call, it's a lot easier to find them.
Do you have a proverbial white whale that you're after that you haven't?
Oh, there's a lot. Let's see, what's my actually currently, yes, a winter wren. So many have been reported on eBird in my area. I've gone to every place that I've seen them in the past. I've only ever photographed them one time, and I've just struck out. But, while doing that, I've found like golden crowned kinglets and red-breasted nuthatches and gotten some good photos of them. So it wasn't a complete loss, but they're tough birds. They're few and far between for the most part. They're only here during migration and winter months, and by here I mean Ohio. I'm sorry, but yeah, that's my nemesis currently.
For all the students in here, be careful because it sneaks up on you. All of a sudden, one day you wake up and you're like, I love birds.
Absolutely.
Yeah. That's how you know you're old.
Well, and I wanted to add to that, like if you all are not big into birding, but you're interested and you don't really know like where to start. I've always like enjoyed birds, but I wasn't like a hardcore bird person until like relatively recently in my life, maybe because I'm getting old. But no, I'm kidding, just kidding. But there's a really great app called Merlin. And Merlin is really awesome because it helps with bird ID and tracking birds. And also if you hear a bird calling and you're like, I just have no idea what that is, you can press a sound ID button and it will be able to, and most of the time it's accurate, not always, but it'll be able to identify the bird based on the call. And some birders are really, really good at bird calls and they just like know all of them. I'm someone who is like notoriously bad at bird calls. Like just really have a hard time with it. Always have, always will. But Merlin has been really helpful in terms of learning bird calls. And it's really cool because if you're walking around and you hear something and you're like, I've never heard that call before, and you take out Merlin and it's like, oh, it's like some crazy migratory species that this is like a once in a lifetime chance to see it. And, then you know what to look for and then you might see it. And that can be a really exciting thing, so.
Also, keep a pair of binoculars handy.
Oh,
Yes.
100%.
Yeah. Always have. I have one at home, in my car, in my office. Keep those binoculars on you.
Actually, just to add to that, that's really how I learned all their calls was, I would hear them in the wild, I'd let Merlin identify them, and then I just started to remember their calls after spending some time with them. But one thing, make sure you keep allow it to use your location, and make sure if it's something really weird, don't post it to eBird without actually setting eyes on it. There was a checklist, an eBird checklist at McGee Marsh, which is a really popular place for May, like fall or spring migration. Somebody had like some kind of fairy wren. I mean, like all these birds from, there's no way they were there.
That's
you know?
in Australia.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's an Australian bird. And it's probably not going to end up in Ohio. You never know. Weirder things have happened. We had a brown booby for a month or two. But yeah, let it use your location is my point.
Yeah. And for those who don't know, eBird is another app that you can use. And it can be really great because you can make like a list of the birds you've seen and it can track you as you're walking around and where you are. I find that it distracts me, so I haven't been as deep into eBird because it can get really competitive and kind of cutthroat, but it is really fun if you want to go about it that way. And it can also be very, very helpful in terms of record keeping and having a record of rare species in different areas. So it can be really really great. So if you do see something, for sure, especially if you get a picture of it and it's unusual, it's always good to log it so that the ornithological community is aware.
I'm with you on that, though. It's like it's hard to take photos of them and also log them all, but I think I've done one checklist, and it was because I was forced to, because I was the only person that saw a summer tanager, which is outside of its range in our area. So
that is crazy.
Yeah. Do you have something? Yeah.
You guys talked about like bird strikes and windows. Do you know if there's any like federal or state regulations or laws around those kinds of things in terms of building? No?
There are not. No.
Yeah, not that I know of.
Yeah.
That's a bummer.
But that's where community comes in, right? Make a big enough stink about it, and people will do something about it. Took a few years at McCormick Place, but it worked.
You had a question?
I was surprised to hear that bird strikes against windows were such a problem, because I've only ever really had awareness of bird strikes on planes. And it sounds like maybe windows are a bigger issue than planes. Were bird strikes on windows? Okay.
Definitely.
Mainly during migration, I would say. I mean, when large groups of them are flying over cities.
And at night too.
Yeah.
They travel the farthest distance at night, and that makes it especially easy for them to just hit a window.
Yeah. And it's typically larger buildings. Turning the lights out helps too, but having some kind of decal there, lets them know they're just, not flying into the sky.
Most buildings use reflection, so the glass that reflects, they don't see the difference. So if it breaks the lights, it looks like open space, and they'll end up flying into it. So that's why the decals can help, because they help break up some of the reflection of lights. Other defects on it. So.
In the building that I referenced, McCormick Place, I mean, it's by no means a skyscraper. It's maybe like an 8 or 10 story convention center, but it's literally right on the lakefront, Lake Michigan in Chicago. And a lot of these birds, these migrating songbirds, when they're heading north, they stop off at that Montrose Point because it's really the only big green space along the coast. So my guess is they were coming down and, striking that as they were kind of getting in there.
I have one last thing to add.
Lawns
are bad.
Yes.
We don't like lawns. Sorry, that's like if you ever have your own yard, consider filling it with native plants, and so it's a habitat, a green space that animals can use. Not only birds, but insects and mammals, and I always think about insects with birds because most birds, even birds that are frugivores, meaning they only eat fruit, feed their offspring insects because developing baby birds need a lot of protein. And so if you're spraying pesticides everywhere or you're in an area that's not insect friendly, that's being cleared all the time or cut all the time, there's not going to be a food source for baby birds, and that's going to cause population decline as well.
And also planting native species brings native insects, and you're more likely to have a wider variety of birds in your yard. They like water features too.
They do.
Birds got to drink.
They love water.
Yeah.
My question for you have a room full of budding scientists in here, is when you're out there studying birds, what are you curious about? What do you wish someone would be studying right now?
Thinking.
That's a good question.
I'm really interested. Something that has popped into my mind a couple times is how canopy cover influences bird populations and how their habitat choice, like where they're going. And this is something that someone I went to grad school with brought up while I was doing radio tracking of birds in Ecuador. We were actually walking around with radio transmitters after catching them and banding them and giving them little radio backpacks. But we noticed that there might be a pattern with, how much light is able to come through the canopy and where they like to do their like mating displays. And there's just so many.
In the light or the dark?
We think so. In the tropics, it's in the rainforest. A lot of times, it's really dark in the understory. But it looked like they were building their courts in areas that are a little lighter. But that was just an observation. I don't know if that's true. But there's so many like behavioral nuances that are, I think, like beyond us in a lot of ways, and things that like we wouldn't think of or pick up on, that I think is really interesting. And like birds, for example, some of them can see ranges of light that we can't see, like UV. And that goes for insects as well. And so the way those things interact is something that crosses my mind from time to time.
I don't really have a good answer to that one.
I was thinking with just your talk about the bird strikes, is I know that they continue to have this question about how we collect data on bird strikes, because a lot of times whoever finds a dead bird doesn't really report it in a scientific way. So a lot of our data on that is not just anecdotal, but they're trying to figure out ways to have proxy data for it.
There are people that volunteer in Chicago, for like to basically collect bird strikes. So there is some order to it, at least in that city.
Shout outs to positive things happening in Chicago.
I just have a lot of like other bird photographer friends in Chicago, so I don't know.
I know there are like some like natural history museums and places that have huge ornithological collections that will take window strike birds and prepare them into skin so that they can have a record of them and add it to their collection. But I don't know if all ornithology collections do that, or if they have the funds for that, or if there's anywhere around here that does that. So yeah, that would be nice to have a better way of tracking those birds.
It would.
Wind farms for electricity do collect a lot of that data, because that is a real problem with those wind turbines. And I mean, we still don't really understand patterns of why that is, and why is it, they're trying a whole bunch of different things to reduce it with those wind turbines. So I know that they're collecting a lot of data on that, but I think in cities it's a lot harder to do.
Yeah.
Is there feuding between cat enthusiasts and bird enthusiasts?
For sure. Yeah, I mean, I love cats, and my cat used to be indoor, outdoor, and that's just how I was, and I just didn't think anything about it until I saw the real stats of how detrimental they are, not only to birds, but, reptiles as well and other small wildlife. But my cat now lives inside, and it is possible. I didn't think it would be possible, but she got in a really bad cat fight, and after that, she was like, "I'm done with this." So there are lots of reasons to keep your cats inside, and it is for the best, for sure. So.
Yeah, I would say as long as the cat's inside, there's no beef,
Yeah.
I've kind of a related question. So Dr. Thomas mentioned, I didn't know that there was an age element to birds. Today's my birthday, so I'm sort of touched.
That's right. Happy birthday. I meant to say that earlier.
I didn't know that.
Birds are super popular, right? It even affected me, right? We got an exclamation point on the flyer. Birds. That was me. So I know there's kind of an obvious attraction because they're really colorful, and let's admit it, we're all jealous that they can fly. I think it's a big part of it. But are there downsides to birding, sort of from a conservation point of view, like the charismatic megafauna objection? Do you see, like in yourself and in those in the community, both from a sort of scientific perspective and an aesthetic perspective, does birding help people's? Is it a gateway drug to conservation, or is it just a sideshow, or how do you think about the relationship between an avid-centered view?
I mean, I can tell you there's a lot of good things to like birding, especially with like eBird lists and stuff, just, for scientific purposes. Some photographers do some unethical things to get photos of birds, though, like baiting, and there's people go back and forth on like callback, like using their bird sounds to attract them. So there's some good and bad, I guess.
Yeah. I think the good outweighs the bad, but
I think
there's
so.
definitely, I think, like any kind of practice, like with like fishing as well and hunting, it's just like you need to be mindful of your impact and not be a problem or be selfish about it, and respect the habitat and the species that are involved. Because overall, I think it raises a lot of awareness, and I feel like it seems like birding has become more popular, like with younger people as well. And I don't know if that was the pandemic or what did that, but I think it's awesome. I think it's really, really great.
Well, I know we're running short on time, but there is a level of differentiation in terms of intelligence throughout the bird community, and there is consensus, or a hypothesis, I should say, that crows in the raven family are kind of the most intelligent.
Corvids.
Problem solving, etc. There's all sorts of examples. And I guess my question to you is, am I correct in assuming this, that at one point there was not a very extensive crow population around urban New Orleans, but now they are extremely abundant. And I'm wondering if y'all know of any studies. I know this is a really specific question, but I guess I'm wondering, has anyone looked at the long-term effects on some of the most intelligent birds becoming extremely abundant? And are we worried about a Hitchcockian effect? I know that's a real specific question, and I know that's outside of the Chicago area. Has anyone heard anything about the effects of any of this? Because they are extremely awesome and abundant, and I'm wondering how.
I think they like trash.
Yeah,
I think that's why.
Then I don't think they're really. I mean, a larger population of those, I don't think would hurt much. I mean, they eat, roadkill. I mean, they clean up.
They're doing so well because they happen to do very well in urban habitats because they're so clever and because they can tear open a chip bag and like So I mean, it's possible that it could be a problem, especially if it got to be like too crazy, and like there have been other issues when there's like tons and tons of pigeons with like disease and too much like bird poop around. But I don't see that. I can't imagine that becoming an issue with the crows, but I don't know if anyone's actually monitoring it.
I wasn't even proposing this from a negative aspect. I was thinking about ecological services.
Yeah, clean up.
Did you?
I know I saw Phil in the Peace Squad. I saw a squirrel up in a tree. Looked like intentionally knocked a squirrel down to it.
Oh, they fight in my yard all the time.
Them all afternoon in the Peace Squad. Yeah.
There's one of my favorite observational pastimes in my yard is watching the crows versus the squirrels.
Sorry, that got dark. On that note, any final questions for our guest?